So we're on the phone with former U.S. Representative for New Mexico 2nd Congressional District and current chair of the New Mexico Republican Party, Steve Pearce. Congressman, welcome back to KLH Radio.
Always nice talking to you, Anthony. Love the work you do over there.
Appreciate that. Now, Congressman, you and I spoke about a year and a half ago or so, and we discussed a couple things. We talked about the impact of cannabis as a crop to the water supply, as well as the gerrymandered maps. Before we talk about the maps, do you mind if I ask you real quick about a question I have about marijuana?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, there was a letter submitted to the governor yesterday, day before. Over 60 marijuana farmers and retailers are asking the state to stop issuing more licenses. The land of enchantment has a very finite amount of water. It's a desert, and marijuana, as you know, is a very water-hungry crop. It concerns me that these farmers are going to be using up all the water, not to mention the fact that apparently there's an oversaturation in the market. Do you have a comment about any of that before we get onto the maps?
Well, it was poorly thought out from the beginning. People were issued licenses, but they were also put into a tax system, and yet there's no enforcement of laws to keep people from growing it illegally outside the tax system. They can grow it in other states any way they want to, bring it across from Mexico. And so the people who follow the law are going to always be at a 15 to 20% disadvantage. In business, you can't take a 25 or 3, 2, 1. You can't take a 15 or 20% hit on your margin and survive. So I think that the whole business model has been deeply flawed from the beginning.
I would definitely agree with you. And again, my other concern is water because, like I said, the cannabis is very, very water hungry, and there's not a whole lot of that stuff here in New Mexico.
Yeah, that's a great concern, too. Always there's pressure between the urban areas trying to take agriculture water from the farmers, from also the ranchers. And so you're going to have that increased conflict now that the cannabis is going to be taking away from other agriculture crops. I will tell you that food security is one of the biggest problems of freedom that we have. In other words, if we're going to be free and have liberty, that it's important that we have a stable food supply. Not having that creates great problems in people's choices. And so imagine as we transition away from growing the crops, the vegetable crops along the Rio Grande River into growing cannabis, we are giving up the people who want to live stable lives and feed their families for those who want to use cannabis for recreational or other purposes. Going to be huge problems down the road for the water, for the application and the allocation of water.
I would agree 100%. We're visiting with the chair of the New Mexico Republican Party, Steve Pearce. Okay, so let's talk about a little thing that happened Wednesday. The Supreme Court will hear the case with regards to the gerrymandered maps. Congrats on that. I know many people have worked on it, but it was you, Congressman, who was at the forefront, who fought with passion. Before we get too far into this, though, can you explain to our listeners what exactly gerrymandering is, please?
Well, gerrymandering is when you draw lines in order to give favor to one group or another. For instance, the eastern side of the state is very Republican, and so what the gerrymandered maps did was split Chaves County into 3 pieces, Lee County right down the middle. Eddy County was also divided, as was Lincoln County, so heavy Republican areas, and those votes were then pushed to align with the far northwest and the far northern part of the state. They basically diminished the ability for conservative, not just conservative Republicans, but conservative Democrats to have a voice in the U.S. Congress. That was their intent, and they succeeded when Yvette Herrell lost the race to the current Democrat representative. And so the Supreme Court basically has said, the U.S. Supreme Court has said gerrymandering is bad. And then the New Mexico Supreme Court has also said any kind of gerrymandering, be it political, racial, or any other kind, any kind of gerrymandering is bad. So we felt like from the beginning that our argument that this was one of the worst gerrymandered maps in the entire country, which it was, we felt that argument would have fertile ground in the New Mexico Supreme Court, and it did. They agreed with us and said that what was going on in front of the Supreme Court was that the Democrats had filed to have the case thrown out. And their argument was really, really flaky. It basically said just because it's not very democratic and it's not very good process doesn't mean that it can't stand, because the vote of the legislature should be supreme. And that was such a terrible argument for them to make. The Supreme Court didn't even seem to acknowledge it, but that was their argument.
So what needs to be said to the court going forward? Whenever you make your appearance, what are we going to be saying in order to make some effective change?
Well, what they said was that the case is going to go back to where they assigned it, to the judge, Judge Van Solen over in Clovis, and that he's supposed to hear the case very quickly. They put that in there, that this has got to be finished by October so that we can be prepared for this coming year, I suspect. But he already, when he issued his initial opinion, that judge had said that the Republican Party made it very strong arguments that the gerrymandering disadvantaged great numbers of people in both parties, and so so it's going back to him to hear the case. The Democrats will argue in favor of the maps that they passed. That's what they have to argue, because that's the law they passed. We're going to argue that it disadvantages so many people that it should be thrown out. Our recommendation is to go back to the original maps. They stood for the last 30 years, basically since Joe Skeen was in office, and then all the time I was in office. Those maps have been pretty well unchanged, and we had always a good conservative voice, even when the Democrats had that seat under Mud Reynolds, Congressman Harold Reynolds from Lee County. He was a conservative Democrat, a conservative voice for the oil and gas region, for the farmers, for the ranchers. But now we're missing that voice. The Democrats intended that, and the court, I think, is going to reverse their maps. What they do in place of that, that's a big question. But the judge will have that opportunity to do that, and he has to do it before October, I think, is the deadline.
Very, very exciting news here, Congressman. I'm glad to hear that this fight looks like it's going to go the distance, so that's awesome. Do you have any other thoughts about this this ongoing battle?
No, we had a lot of Republicans saying, "Oh, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money," and it's been very expensive getting to this point. But I feel like having a voice in Congress is tremendously important. Few people understand it, but when you're there is a collegiality in the committees that say that if you're on the committee of jurisdiction and you have an objection to almost any bill, if it is your district, then everybody backs away and lets you by yourself determine that. So many of the things that the extremists were wanting to implement in the oil and gas industry that currently the Biden administration is doing, those things couldn't get through if there was a Republican voice saying, wait, I'm on the committee. The Resources Committee is the basic committee of jurisdiction. I'm on the Resources Committee. This is my district, and I object to what the Democrats are trying to do. And in both parties, for the full 14 years I was in D.C., both parties would honor that if it was your district. And so that's what we're missing right now, is that conservative support for water issues in the West, water issues in New Mexico, for the oil and gas issues, for mining issues. Few people understand that rare earth mining is tremendously important. There used to be 13 of those rare earth mines in the southern district of New Mexico. Those all got shut down. We were in the process of trying to get them open back up and create jobs. And again, these are the differences, and what one voice makes such a big difference there in Washington.
Now, Congressman, I got one more thing for you, then I'll let you go. I know you're a busy, busy man. News is out that your wife is ill, and you fought for this even through that difficult time, which cannot be easy and had to be very conflicting at times. So on behalf of those who felt screwed out of a voice, I'm going to give you a huge thank you for this battle. Now, my audience will send all the thoughts and prayers you want and need. All that's needed from you is to give the word. Anything on that?
Sure. My wife discovered about a month ago that she had gotten an infection in the spine, the bones of the spine, and so they're giving her heavy doses of antibiotics to try to kill that infection. infections in the bone are pretty difficult. The consequences are pretty severe. Right now, she's wrestling with those heavy doses of antibiotics. And so just I think the first thing is the healing. We appreciate the prayers for healing, but also the steadfastness and being able to cope with the uncertainty of what's going on during this time when the doctor says, okay, we measured, the damage is not too great, but we got to take the antibiotics and we won't know for 6 weeks if it's worked. And that's a very uncertain time to know if your body is healing or not. And so just the prayers for coping with the uncertainties. Those two things would be huge. And I appreciate you mentioning that.
Former U.S. Representative for New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District and current chair of the New Mexico Republican Party, Steve Pearce. Steve, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Anthony, always great talking to you. Keep up the good work.
Appreciate that. Take care, sir.
Yes, sir. Goodbye.